Welcome to Just Wanna Quilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School. My name is Elizabeth Townsend Guard, and I'm your host. So what is Just Wanna Quilt? I don't know. We talk about all kinds of things. Quilting, of course, and a little bit of copyright, and I don't know, pretty much anything that comes up that we want to talk about. It's informal, it's fun. This is our 4th season, and it's all about sort of learning and exploring. So today we talk with Chappell Monroe of May Chappell. She's been a guest before. We adore her. We're catching up to see how she's doing. This is just kind of catching up with people. We're sort of just checking in, seeing how you're doing. And that's pretty much it. Does that sound okay to you?
That sounds awesome. I'm excited.
Oh, it's so nice to see you.
I know. It's so weird to get to see everyone after lockdown.
So true. So it seemed kind of appropriate. We're on our 4th season now. And so we're kind of just checking back in with friends and guests that we've had to sort of see how things are going. Because it seems like that's what people need at the moment, right? We're really kind of just checking to make sure everybody's still on the planet and doing okay like and all that.
A comfort visit.
Exactly. So to start, I know the answer to this, but can you, and we're going to, I think that I didn't put the dogs away because they're so tired of being put away. But let's see if they bark.
I love a visitor, so.
Okay. So for preservation purposes, I know the answer, but can you tell me your name and where you're calling from?
Yeah, my name's Chappell Monroe, and I'm calling from Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
Awesome. And your brand is?
My brand is May Chappell, which is named for my grandmother.
Right. Does that get people confused? Do you get called May all the time?
People call me May all the time, and I just answer to it. I think it's fun. Yeah. But I kind of like that. I liked the idea of kind of honoring the tradition that quilting is often passed through generations. Yeah. So that was why I did it. But I mean, if people call me May, it doesn't bother me.
Yeah. I remember that. I thought that was so very cool. I think honoring our people before us it's a really important thing, you know?
And especially in this industry, I think for so many of us, it is a family tradition. Yeah. You know, like it definitely, I will like say stuff to students that my grandmother used to say to me, you know?
Right.
So.
Right. And important that it doesn't get lost, because I think we're now in this hyper-capitalism consumerist space, and yet quilting exists outside of that as well. So it's trying to have that balance of meeting both traditions, I guess, you know.
And I think too, in our industry, it's almost more respected when it takes you longer. You know, when someone says, oh, I hand quilted this quilt, or like right now I'm working on a big English paper piecing project that's long-term. And it's like, people almost respect those more because everything else in our lives is so
fast.
Now.
Yes. Exactly. So we're going to start with a couple of questions that we've been asking people, which was sort of like, how was your last year and a half? And then we're going to move on to kind of what's happening now, if that works for you. Does that sound like
that's
okay?
Awesome.
Cool. So, so tell us your story. How, let's take us back almost a year and a half ago. It's hard to believe. It doesn't feel like a year and a half.
It both feels like it was last weekend and like it was 10 years ago.
Exactly.
So
So take us back to that and sort of what will you do? So March of 2020, tell us what you were doing and how did your life change?
Kind of how it switched. Well, I, like a lot of people, the last thing I did was go to QuiltCon, and so it was like we all left QuiltCon in this sort of, something's happening around the world.
Because QuiltCon was it in Austin it was somewhere in Texas,
in Austin,
right?
And it was like the end of February. Like I remember flying home and they were still like tracking case by case.
Yeah.
And my mom like called the airport to find out someone's flight number because someone had tested positive on one of the flights. And it's like, that's so crazy to me that we knew about like one single case then. And then it just, but for me, and I think this is probably again true for lots of people who do what I do, I travel and teach. And in like the span of a couple weeks, I saw thousands of dollars worth of teaching, just like canceled overnight.
Now let's because I think that's a really interesting part of the story, because it was happening like you couldn't have taught if you wanted to, right? All these events were getting canceled because it wasn't like they were panicking. It was that you weren't legally allowed to teach.
Right.
So
And
what was happening to those contracts? What was happening? Like everybody was in panic in crazy ways. And I think the people that, the people that rely on performances, which is our quilting industry, musicians, teachers, those sorts of things, really got hit hard. So tell me a little bit more about sort of that part for you.
My contract says basically like, if you cancel within a certain number of days, you still have to pay me. But it's also like, I'm a reasonable human being. I certainly wasn't going to enforce that.
Right.
So basically what I did was reschedule everyone. And at the time they were saying it was going to be like a couple weeks or a couple months.
Right.
So I rescheduled everyone for last summer, and then I got to reschedule everyone a second time. And those contracts are just now getting fulfilled,
Amazing.
And it's been 18 months. And so I did a lot of online teaching. I switched to Zoom, and some guilds wanted to do Zoom, some didn't.
Yeah.
And certainly a lot of guilds that did Zoom also only did lectures or, didn't do, like, most of the time when I'm booked, I'm doing a lecture and then I'm doing a workshop, and sometimes even more than one workshop.
Yeah.
And so that's a very different amount of money than suddenly you're just doing a lecture.
Yeah.
So it was kind of, I would say I pivoted, and it worked out fine, but I also felt like I was running a marathon and like reinventing my business. It felt like the first year again, it felt like you were like scrambling and using every connection you had, and like really having to work to get just one thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, like at the same time, I don't know, I'm always a glass half full person. And so I loved, like, I taught a workshop and I had a woman who'd been homebound for a year prior to the pandemic. And she was like, I'm so excited with how much is online now.
Yeah, it's true.
Because, she like was able to take classes.
Yeah.
And so I think like there were a lot of benefits. I will tell you.
Yeah, it even the playing field for those that were disabled or invisible disabled, or that had to take care of children, parents, others.
Right.
Or who don't like to drive at night. Like there was just a lot of benefit. It's so funny because my husband does a lot of he does I'm a cultural historian, but he does like cultural studies and economics and things like that. And so there's this notion of a paradigm shift, and because it was so dramatic, it'll be interesting to see if we do have more, that if it does, I don't think it's going to go away. I mean, I think that the guilds are going to be meeting in person, but there is something nice about being able to not have to go out and to be able to see you and take classes from you. So it'll be interesting to see how much that paradigm shift stays with the quilting industry. Do you see the online stuff still continuing at the moment, or do you think that we'll all go back to in person?
I think both parts will stay. I think I definitely have, especially a guild that's further away that wants to book me. For me, I would rather do it online. When you travel, you're giving up 2 days of travel.
Oh, it's the worst. Yes.
And so
I mean, some people like to travel, but it is just a lot. It's a lot of physical for a very little payoff, yeah.
And I love being in person, and I do love travel, but at the same time, I think that both aspects are here to stay. I do think it will be, it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing I did during lockdown is I wrote a book.
You did?
I did.
Look at that. Let's see your book.
I just got it. It's called Jump Into Sewing. I'll try to make it
Jump Into Sewing is the book. And where did you publish it?
I did it through C&T Publishing.
Nice.
But it's one of those things that like I never had time for, and then all of a sudden I had time for it.
That's very cool.
So that was like my big what I did during lockdown.
I love it. So tell me a little bit about the book.
So it's geared towards people who are like, you've just gotten a sewing machine and you want to learn how to sew.
Yeah.
And it just does kind of the basics of like, this is how a sewing machine works. This is how you cut.
Great.
This is how but it also is good. Even if you already know how to sew, it has lots of like charts about stabilizers and charts about needles and,
Very cool.
like that. I feel like people, I know sometimes even I am like, oh, what needle am I supposed to use, you know?
Right.
So it's
Did you
got,
feel like you learned yourself? I always feel like I'm writing a book on social media and sort of what every business needs to know about social media, the legal side of social media right now. And I'm learning so much because you have to go in depth and you have to kind of know it. Like people always say that you really get to know it when you have to teach it or write it. Did you feel that way with, yeah?
No, absolutely. Well, even just like the part where I was talking about different substrates, I was like, I don't know, I just touched the fabric and I have to like really, you know, explore. I want to read your book on social media. I need that book.
Totally. That's my thing. I think everybody, it's so interesting because I teach social media and in 2 different programs. And over the last 5 years, like all the books were written around 2012 and all of them are out of date. So I finally just was like, okay, I'm writing my own book. But yeah, it's crazy how much has sort of moved. I mean, so much. I mean, it's complicated. I mean, that's really what it comes down to is, you know, there's just a lot to be looking at. So yeah, so I'm hoping to get that ready for Quilt Market because I think that's the next really important space that we're playing in. But yeah, I would love for you to read it and see what you think.
Yes. Well, I always feel like we're making it up as we go along with social media. You know, people will ask questions and they're like, well, I saw that you did this. And I was like, I did. I don't know if it's allowed, but I did.
Right. And I think what's happening now is that the law's catching up. So the FTC is catching up and the Federal Trade Commission and the cases, and like it took them a time to sort of catch up. And COPA, which is for children, keeping kids under 13 safe online in terms of their personal information. There's a ramp up in the law that like it actually now really they're starting to enforce it in ways that they figured out what the law was, but they're also starting to enforce it in really interesting ways. So that's what I've learned in the last.
I feel like the lines have become extraordinarily blurred between like us saying, you know, oh, look at this cool rotary cutter that I love. And it's like, well, you got a box of them for free. You need to say that.
Hugely.
You know,
I really struggle with that. It's interesting because it's really clear that if it's a sponsor, that if you put an ad, and I know that free product is considered that, but in our world, it isn't quite, right? So like you send me a pattern or you send me a rotary cutter, like I still need to let people know that that's happening, but it feels like the language isn't right. Because I don't feel like if you send me a pattern that I'm somehow, I'm an influencer maybe, but I'm not.
You're not necessarily endorsing it. Like there's no promise of a positive review.
Right.
I struggle with fabric. Like I get so much free fabric and it's like, well, every time I use a scrap of free fabric, am I supposed to say I got this fabric?
Right.
You know, versus obviously if I received all the fabric for a quilt and I'm showing the quilt, I'm like, look at this fabric that Wyndham sent or whatever it is. Like that's a more obvious line. But then what if I'm making like a little scrappy thing? Am I supposed to say, well, this centerpiece of fabric I received?
Yeah, it's very interesting.
It's hard.
So, and I was thinking about that. I saw the tour of your studio. And what I thought was really interesting about it was, again, I don't know what stuff you got for free or didn't get for free. And, you know, what your sponsor or what not. I mean, I know you're Bernina ambassador, but like, you don't have like, I think it's a little confusing. I think the rules. And so that's what I haven't gotten to I'm writing the ambassador chapter this, or influencer chapter this weekend, but it's just, it doesn't necessarily fit with the world that we live in, and particularly with quilting, because as you said, you can have a bits of scraps in there. Although at the same time, I feel like we should say to people, oh, I got this cutting mat was sent to me and I really like it, because there's something about the difference between someone sending you something to try and putting your dollars behind it that people should know. Like that, to me, I try to be really clear and I try to buy more things. When I first started this, I was so excited to get all this free stuff, but I feel like I try to vote with my dollars. I keep saying that like, it's really important for me to purchase stuff as opposed to just have free things come. Because then I can be like, yes, I really like this sewing machine because I purchased, I researched and purchased it. And so I think that, Yeah, I think that authentic voice matters at this point, you know?
And I think that authentic voice translates to consumers who are listening to you. Cause like, I love my Aliso iron, and I often am like, I purchased that Aliso iron. I love it.
Right.
You know, I would buy it again. And I think that carries weight. But
I think so too, right?
Yeah.
And I used to get, I don't know if you felt this way, but I used to get really nervous about like, oh, I love my Juki, right? I'm like way into my Juki 2010. I love it. I don't have any affiliation with them. But then I also felt like, well, what about like, it all got really concerning to me because like, well, am I giving them free advertising? Like, I'm not making any money off of it. Would they be mad at me for saying like, there's like this kind of weird kind of product thing that's kind of much more mercurial than like, oh, I'm an influencer or I'm an ambassador. Those are easy. There's just so many more relationships that are kind of confusing, I think.
They are, but I also like my Bernina I bought, you know, and the way their ambassador program works, some people have loaner machines. Some people just are like, I'm what's called a legacy ambassador because I continue to use their product, but I no longer have anything on loan. Yeah. And so it's like, that's different to people, but it's just such a weird gray area. And one thing I will say about that partnership in particular is they don't put any parameters about what we can say. Like if we want to say, I don't love this about that machine, that's okay. You know, and I have partnered with companies in the past that said, this is the brand, you must only use this brand. You cannot show pictures of that, of any other brand. And I'm like, I'm not signing that. That's not realistic.
That's insane. Right. That's not how quilting works. And you're messing me up. Yeah. I think that's really interesting. I think, you know, I did one ambassadorship early on with Michael Miller. I'm not ambassador. I guess I was a brand ambassador. And again, I felt like a lot of pressure. I felt like, you know, it's really different if like companies send you something, which is fine, but something about like the weird space of like being like, oh, well, they sent you fabric, but now you have to make something with the fabric and you have to post, and like it just, to me personally, wasn't really where I wanted to play. But I mean, again, I'm not coming at it. I'm very shy about my quilting, as you probably don't know that, but I think that, I don't know. I feel like this is where I've gotten to. Now, I don't know if the law supports it because, again, I haven't finished writing this chapter. I feel like just be honest. Like, be like, okay, this company sends me a bunch. It's like C&T Publishing sends me a whole bunch. I'm on their list. So I get a whole bunch of books every month, which is great. And then we send them out to other people and do stuff with it. And I think it's really interesting and it helps us understand what's happening in the publishing world. I think if just honest, like, look, we got a whole bunch of books from them and now we're sending them out, versus I saw this book and I have to buy it. I think people just should, as long as you're honest about it, I think you're okay. That's my feeling.
And I also think as long as you're honest that it's something you would normally use, like I prefer fabric companies that just are like, here are all of our fabrics. Please let us know what you would like to work with. We'll be happy to send you some, you know, and it's much more organic where I say, oh, that fabric would look good in this design I'm working on. Send that. I don't do a ton of partnerships just because I feel like if I partner with a brand, I'm giving a stamp of approval for that whole brand.
You are. You're taking your brand. You're taking your brand and saying, hey, I mean, I think it's I think that we don't really recognize that as much. I think there's a kind of gathering of brands that happens. Oh, I want everybody to endorse me, you know, by having giveaways and all kinds of other things. It legitimizes me. Like that's sort of an early kind of thing. And then you start to sort of push back and be like, well, now our brand is strong. So does it mean, what do we want our brand to be representing? Tell me a little bit about, I'm on your page. Tell me a little bit about, I want to get to your, a couple of things. Do you have a thing? Do you have a live thing like soon?
I do. It's at 3 Eastern. I'm good.
So tell me a little bit about Wonderful and your affiliate membership with. I really like the Wonderful people. So tell me a little bit more.
Well, and Wonderful is a great example. So I use Wonderful for a specific technique I teach, which is a blind machine applique. So it sort of mimics hand applique, but you do it on the machine. and they have this thread called Invisifil that I just love. And it's so great because I used to previously use like monofilament for the technique, and it was frustrating, and most machines don't love monofilament. And so I found this Invisifil, and then I use a bobbin thread from them as well. And what I love about them is they have a teacher program where they let us purchase like singles of threads so that we can try things. Because a lot of brands are like, you can buy from us, but you have to buy 8 spools or something, you know?
Yeah, they're really nice.
So Wonderfil is just really good with that. And so that is a company I partner with, but Wonderfil also understands that I use other brands, you know, like there's no pressure to say you only use Wonderfil.
And I think that we've got to get to that point, because I mean, I think, you know, seriously, realistic. We're doing our first, we're creating our own first block of the month project. And part of that is thinking about how we're integrating all kinds of other products and brands and things. And it was like, well, we don't want to choose. Like we wanted to be like the way quilters are, right? Like we're not like, we grab from all different places and like do things. And that's kind of the joy of the quilting part. We're not like, you know, we're not like, it's not like a football team, right?
Don't like only one thing, you know, like if you're using only one thing, you've made a conscious choice for that to like have a brand specific. I was actually talking about all the threads I use for applique with another quilter, and I held up like, you know, the 7 different things I use, and it was some YLI, some Wonderfil, some Aurifil, you know, and she joked, she's like, you're shouting out to every brand that exists, you know, because I was, but that's what I use.
Right.
You know?
And that's the joy of it, right? Like, I mean, to have this much consumerist activity, why wouldn't you engage in it and sort of see? Okay. So I want to make sure that we get to, because these are short interviews, but they sometimes creep. I want to talk about the Quilting Hour. Tell me about what the Quilting Hour is, which is what you have to go to live in a little while.
Yeah, live in a couple hours. So the Quilting Hour was CNT during the pandemic was doing these happy hour programs where they would just pick a topic and have on a couple of their authors or experts talk about the topic. And so I went on one about sewing, and I went on another one about sewing machines. And I said, well, why isn't there one about quilting? You know, there's so many like specific topics within quilting.
Yeah.
And they were like, knock yourself out. And so I was like, I'm going to do it. So I started, and it's basically me and then 2 other experts, and we talk about a different topic each week. And it's just a conversation. It's just us talking about how we do things. Like for the applique topic, we talked, you know, one gal did needle turn, one gal does a machine with stabilizer. I do blind machine applique, you know, so we all talked about kind of the different ways we do it. And it's great I wanted it to be where we can expose someone who's never done that. Like if you're a beginner and you've never sewn a curve, then you can come and listen and kind of get ideas on where to start. But also if you already are experienced, then you're hearing kind of how different experts do it. Yeah. And one thing I've loved is there's no common answer, you know? Yeah. It's all over the place. And like the curved episode, I was like, do you rotary cut or scissor cut? Well, they all use different size rotary cutters, and sometimes they scissor cut. And, you know, do you pin or not pin? Well, some pin and some don't pin, you know? And so it's just, and I think that really exposes people to there's no right answer. There's always lots of right answers. Yeah. Yeah. One thing I always harp on when I'm teaching is I'm going to show you a few right ways to do it, but I may also mention some wrong ways. You know, it's it's never black and white. This is the way you should do it. This is the way you shouldn't do it. But there are ways that you're going to be more successful.
And you're on a platform called Creative Spark, which is part of CNT Publishing. Am I right?
It is. It's their online learning. So you can go on and take classes. And so the Quilting Hour is on that platform. And what's great is people can watch it live, but it's also recorded, and you have a year to watch it after the recording. So.
Very cool. And they really do have a lot of quite significant classes. How has the platform been to work on? Like, what is their platform like, and how do you like that?
I love it because they're sort of handling all the tech support part.
I love it.
Really all of the, you know, I can't figure out where to log in. I can't, whatever. but it does allow us, we have like resource pages that we can post. And so there's a lot of interaction with your instructor. It's a really nice platform to kind of, you can watch a little bit of your video, pause it, go back. Everything's organized in kind of, the quilting hour classes are just 1 hour long class, but I'm doing a learn to quilt class on there that I'm working on right now. And it's nice because it's kind of divided up into different sections where people can kind of learn at their own pace and go back. Very cool. You might watch the cutting one a couple times.
And do you have like, it seems like sometimes it connects to the books that have been written by their authors and then sometimes not. Is that right?
Yeah. So it just kind of depends. I did a learn to quilt one, and then I'm going to do a sewing one that kind of corresponds with my book. But sometimes there's a book connected to it and sometimes there's not. There's no rule.
When you do that, are you restricted in anything you could do in terms of the teaching that course in other spaces? Or, I mean, because it seems like it's kind of part of marketing the books that are C&T publishing books so that they wouldn't be restrictive on where you teach other places.
We're allowed to teach our books anywhere, and we can actually offer that class anywhere. We just can't offer it for a lower price. That's the only restriction.
Yeah, so you can even offer it online other places.
Yeah, like I could list the class on my own platform as long as I'm charging the same price they're charging. I'm not going to, because then I have to be tech support. But but I could.
Interesting. Do you know, in terms of the recordings, are you giving them the recordings, or do you hold the copyright in those recordings, or do they hold, like, how does that work?
I don't know. That's a good question. I know with our recorded videos, there are videos. Like we retain the right. We could say take it down.
Right. And you can use it other places. That's what sort of sparked it, because if you're able to use it other places, that means that you would hold the copyright in it, or they'd be giving you a license. And I think the restriction on the cost is an interesting thing. That makes sense. They don't want to be having
they just don't want you to undercut. Like, I can't go sell it for $10 less so that everyone goes to my site, kind of thing.
Yeah, I get that. I get that.
But yeah, we own the video, so. I don't know what happens to the Quilting Hour, because they're technically recording it for me.
They're recording it, right?
Yeah.
Right. And there's multiple people involved. So
right. But we do all click that we're okay being recorded at the beginning of it.
Weird. We live in interesting times, because most of the time it doesn't really matter, right? Like you guys are having a conversation. It's not like, I don't know.
Yeah. It's not, but when you click to record this program, it asks me if I approved you recording it.
Yeah. And that's different than holding the copyright, right?
Yeah.
So at the end of every interview, I ask if it's okay for you to post. And then and people don't know this that are listening, when, I ask people to sign up on we use Calendarly, but part of it is because I've got a little legal thing that says that you're right. So there's a little thing that says, yes,
that we've approved.
You can use it for commercial and non-commercial purposes. And I'm giving you a license to use it. Copyright Office has always been really weird about interviews. I think because there were enough famous people that were getting interviewed, that your part of your interview is you hold copyright, and my part, I hold mine, which is really stupid. I mean, right? Like you can see,
it doesn't seem valuable if it's a one-sided conversation.
No, and I think they did that because they wanted to make sure that I didn't interview super famous you, and then I suddenly use it in ways that you don't want. So it's a way to have the person interviewing, like I interview, I don't know, somebody super famous, and they still hold the copyright. It's a really stupid thing though, because it doesn't make any sense. So you still have to do like a license to say, I can use your part of your interview, right? It's stupid, but it also makes for a lot of messy archival problems, because the archives didn't get permission to do anything with all of these interviews that happened in think about the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And so they feel really constrained because they don't have permission from they don't have like some weird off, things. So anyway, that's a whole off topic. To use it. Right. So
no, but that's really interesting. I feel like you could teach classes about these things for years and I'd still have questions.
Well, it's kind of what I do. So I feel the same way about your stuff. I totally love you. I just like every time we're on, I'm like, I don't know. I just think you're so cool and so amazing. I was trying to figure out what our project is. I'm like, oh, I just have people on that I fangirl about, and then I ask them about copyright. It's like the dumbest.
I think it's wonderful. I do. And I am really excited about your social media book because
I am too.
It's a stressful thing. I think because for those of us who are trying to be authentic, it's like we're trying to be both authentic and legal,
Right. Well, and it's been really interesting. I'm doing the chapter on employees right now. And so there's a whole thing about like, when can you fire an employee? And there's a whole it's not clear, right? So somebody says something nasty about your company, and can you just fire them? Well, if it's just about, sometimes you can, but then if it's about wages or working conditions, you can't. So if you come on and say, Lee never pays me on time and they're the worst person ever, can't fire them. But if they're like, Lee sucks, and she's smelly too, right? So you can be like, oh yeah, you can get fired for that. Right. So it's this really interesting thing. But then the next part of it is, can you turn your employees in? So I noticed that you start like saying things about like, I'm going to go do X at this place and I hate everybody. Can you warn people about employee behavior? Can you turn your employees in without any kind of repercussion? On social media? And yeah, you can, right? So there's just all this kind of, our world is out there in a way that just hadn't been before. And it
changes all the time.
And it changes all the time. It's so interesting and weird. And, think about C&T publishing, right? So if you suddenly are starting to say super racist things, right? Like that's where it comes down to. So like with art law, it's always about poop, right? Like it's always about poop. Like that's like, if a museum gets in trouble, it's because it's got something about poop with religious icons. Like that's always the problem. With this, it's always racist, right? Super racist comments, right? So it isn't that you go on and you say something about anything else, right? Like you could be like, prices on fabric is unfair, right? Nobody cares. But if you say like something super racist, then yeah. So what can they do, right? So in your contract, in your like publishing contract, do they have the right to pull your book? Do they have the right to not promote it? Do they have a right to denounce you? Like all of a sudden, like these questions of like your behavior is really important, because can you get canceled? Can guilds cancel you because you don't now?
Yeah.
So it's this whole weird thing of like your behavior on social media directly impacts your economic and your job. And as long as these companies have codes of contact in place, meaning you represent our company even when you're not, even in your personal space, it seems that they really can, as long as it's not about wages or working conditions, that you can get fired or things can change. And I don't think people realize that. They think like, oh, well, it's my personal space. I can do whatever I want.
And I was going to say, I mean, I also think that's interesting because it's like, I'm not an employee of C&T. I'm
right.
Like our contract is I don't even know what kind of contract that's.
Right. So you want to go back and look at your contract, right? So I don't really know what, and have publishers updated that to say, you need to sort of meet our code of conduct, or, we're going to ask for, we're going to drop you. Because they don't want their brand harmed, right? So, that you're out there at representing them in some way. I don't know. It's all very crazy. I think I'm getting more nervous about social media the more I learn about it legally. So, but I just think,
well, and not that I did not share any racist comments, I promise. But like, I know that I hold back more of my personal life than I used to.
Yeah.
And it's not even, and for me, it's just like this realization. I had someone come up to me at Quilt Market and they were like, I love your blue fireplace. And I was like, what?
I know. It's weird, right?
It just gave me this weird moment where I was like, oh, they like know what my house looks like.
Right.
Right. And so I know I'm more guarded about it, which is sad.
Yeah. I think that in some way it's like, remember the blogging, the 2008 blogging, where it was sort of like everybody, I tell them my whole life is blogging.
Yes.
Like, so, and I think that we're sort of moving to another space. I think that, that sort of so, I mean, I think that's just the nature of new technology and life and all of that. But yeah, I don't know. I think, it's funny. I got kicked out of the, I don't know if this is they were going to talk about it anyway. So I got kicked out of the pattern makers group really early on in so there's a pattern makers group and on Facebook, and I was just kind of there, but they all were kind of they were doing things I was kind of a little concerned about, in the sense of like, some of them were like, well, I'm not making masks. Like, my family's telling me that they need a mask, and like, I'm like, that's what they think I am. They're taking it very personally. And they were posting it on their personal pages and other things about like, screw this mask making stuff. And I just said, be careful of your brand, because the people that you're selling to are making masks. So, just recognize that like that may boomerang back to you, because they may see you as not supportive or whatever. Like and they got really mad. Right. And then a whole bunch of them messaged me personally and said, are you talking about me? Which I wasn't, which I thought was really interesting. But again,
everyone assumes.
Yeah. Right. And I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. Now I'm going to go look at your page. But it sort of, we talk about trademark all of the time, and like everything you do is about your brand as a human. Like, we're all self-brand, like we're all branded. And I think that that's just what the law is catching up to. That like, if your brand if your brand as an employee doesn't fit with my brand as an employer, we're going to part ways. And the law says that's okay. So I don't know. It's just weird. It's a very interesting space.
I think at the beginning of the pandemic, it's funny you brought up the mask thing, because I sold masks at the beginning of the pandemic, and I produced a very nasty series of commentary between feuding people who think I'm evil for selling masks, that I should make it for free to serve my country, and other various reasons. And why would I charge for that? Versus people who understood that I lost my livelihood, and that was a way to make money again. You know?
And we support, I felt like it was like the stay-at-home versus working mom arguments. It felt that way to me. Yeah. It was like a war between women in this really strange way, as opposed to being supportive of each other. And it just felt like, we supported artists here in town, that we were giving them fabric, personal. Right? Yeah. Like, we were doing as much as we possibly could for people making masks and selling them, because we knew that a lot of people's livelihoods were really in jeopardy.
My thing is too, I happened to donate as many masks as I sold, but even if I hadn't,
didn't matter.
You know,
you get to decide.
I wasn't critical of someone who donated all the masks they made, but I just think, I don't know, I was shocked by the like personal nature of it. And
I was too. And then the Black Lives Matter stuff happened,
wants to see.
Right? Yeah, it was weird. For our community, it was very stressful, like May, June, July, because we had the mask controversy, which was super controversial. Are you making them? Are you not making them? Are you selling them? Are you not selling them? Dividing our community in crazy ways, in every way you can imagine. And then all the Black Lives Matter and the protesting happened as well. So by the time I just felt like, we were doing our mask series. We did 65 interviews on masks, because I wanted to learn, I wanted to understand them. And then we did a 2-day conference with like 55 guests or something. It was like this insane thing. But as we were finishing that, all the Black Lives Matter stuff was happening. And so it shifted even our conversation as we were talking about masks. It was quite a moment for quilting and for the world, but for our little community, a lot going on.
It was
a lot going on.
And I think, I was shocked. I've never shared like any political views, but I did support Black Lives Matter. And the people who came at you, I was just like, I'm sorry, I have no time for that.
It was weird. We had a few in our, our only rule in the Just Wanna Quilt Facebook group, which if people are listening, please join in, and we have great conversations there, is kindness. And kindness is a hard thing to have sometimes, which means civility and respect. And we had a few incidents that weren't that kind. And it was interesting to watch sort of how does a group all of the Facebook groups had this problem, but how do you sort of navigate when times are hard and people are stressed and there are really issues that are happening. So,
well, you can't possibly know everyone else's story. I was just, the mask thing, like I happen to be single and like my whole job pays for my life, like I don't have a fallback.
That's right.
And I'm glad you do, but
that's right.
It was really interesting.
And I was just so pleased, and sort of there was such, to watch the people that we knew that were able to survive making masks, which to me was very heartwarming. That you could sort of figure, and that once people recognized that was what was happening, that what I saw was a lot of support of those artists that needed the income. That if once you recognize, this person's selling it to help their income, that was really cool. So absolutely. I thought that there was a lot of love in the world at the same time as a lot of chaos. So
yes, I would agree. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right. So we didn't stay to our half hour, 20-minute thing, but that's okay.
It's all right. I love talking to you. So
I love talking to you too. Okay. So I have 2 questions for you. First, how things are going. Are you going to market this year? Do you think you'll be at market?
I decided not to go to fall market, but I think I will go to spring market, which I kind of do fall market every other time.
Yeah.
I don't always go to fall. I really love spring. It's a little smaller. Yeah. And honestly, just the dates weren't that great for me. There's not like a huge reason I'm not going, but I do plan on going to spring.
Cool. Yeah. And spring is for me a little harder. Is that where is it? Salt Lake City? Is it
Salt Lake? Yeah.
Yeah. I'll have to see. Cause I only travel by train. So it's always like, is that worth it? But it would be fun. I've never been to Salt Lake City, so it would be really fun.
Salt Lake is a really, really fun market. It's just, It's a really neat town. And yeah.
Well, because there's so much quilting going on there and so many companies there. I imagine Absolutely. It's very thriving in some way, right?
Absolutely. And it's a really easy town to like walk around and yeah. I've enjoyed it. You should try. That is a long train ride.
Yes. But I mean, it's funny because I take the train a lot. So I'm really like, okay, as long as it's under 24 hours, I'm okay with that. The 30-hour train rides are not as much fun. They just get to be a lot,
My friend and I did the Coastal Starline one from Seattle to LA.
You did? How was that?
It was great fun. We did it after the Oregon market. It was great fun. Yes. We had a blast.
How long did it take you to get from Seattle to LA?
It was like 24 hours. Like we got on, it was longer than that because we got on at like 8 a.m. and got there the following day at like 6 p.m.
Yeah. Those are like, I don't know, like I've done 30-hour ones and they're okay, but it just feels, I really like to squirrel food a lot. So it's harder to like at 30 hours, sort of like, how are you going to plan for, they have food on the train and they have lots of good food on the train, but I'm like a super squirreler when it comes to food. And so it's like, well, how are we going to get to like, it's harder.
We did our little car we had food as part of it.
Yeah.
We joked, it was like you were constantly eating. They were like,
it's true. It is totally true. Yeah. And when you have like a little cabin on the train, the food's included. So, and they have like, you can go either bring it to your car, or you can go to the dining cart and then you sit with other people. And it feels like you're like in a weird time warp.
It does. And we like made a friend and then we asked to sit with him at the next meal.
That's very sweet. I like that.
So
yeah,
we had a good time.
I like train travel. I really do. And I think also what's lovely about it is you can't really get very good cell phone reception. You can listen to podcasts, but you can't do much else. And so it's like this time where the world just goes away.
Yes.
And I think that part is really nice. Like I yearn for that. Like I know those days are coming up and it will just be my own special quiet time.
Well, we were in it for the scenery and we just like sat there and hand stitched and watched, Yeah. We're both from the East Coast and got to like watch everything go by. And I loved it. It was great.
I always kind of really want to do a JustWannaQuilt tour. Like keep talking about that either as with an RV, like a big RV where we like almost like a bus like a tour bus, a band bus kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
Or on Amtrak, right? So that we could all just be sewing and like whatever, but it would be very like, that's my two dreams is those big, like just go on adventure.
I'm in for the Amtrak one.
Fun, right? Yeah. Okay. So life now, how are things now? Are things getting back to normal? Are they still weird?
Yeah. I have my first in-person event Tuesday.
Nice.
So yeah, things are getting back to normal and they feel good. I feel like things are picking up again. And I think I'm going to still do like the Zoom classes. I finished up a Zoom class last night and all those ladies were like, what's the next one?
Yeah.
So I do think that will stay around. But I feel like things are kind of back.
Things are back. And I think there's a kind of a little worried. I don't know about you. There are certain places we still haven't gone yet. But I think also maybe gratitude. Like there's a sense of like really loving the fact that you can go to a particular thing. And I think we used to take that we take it for, you know what I mean? Like we just like thought, I don't know.
You could always go places. Yeah. No.
Yeah. Like it was just an obligation. Oh, I got to go do that class. I got to do that. But now it's like, oh, I get to go see someone and have lunch and.
Well, and I think there's things, like my family started Zooming every week and we're still Zooming, and it's kind of like I talk to my brother all the time and my parents talk to my brother all the time, but it wasn't all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think some of those things will stay in a good way.
Very cool.
But yeah, I love it. It feels good to be out and about again.
It does. Well, thank you for this time. I am just really nice to like catch up and see you and see how you're doing. And I don't know, it's really, I think that's what we're on season 4. That's what I think season 4 has become about, is just connecting with people and saying hi and checking in, see how you're doing.
Well, it was really good to see you. I'm always game.
I love it. Yeah. I love it. All right. Are you cool with us posting? Do you need to?
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right. Hold on just a second. Okay, hold on. So you've been listening to the Just Wanna Quilt podcast. This is our 4th season. Craziness. Come join us in our Facebook group. We have tons of fun there. You just join the group. Answer a few questions. It's awesome. We also are starting TikTok. So if you like that space, come join us there. We're kind of on Instagram. We spend some time on Instagram. We're not as good about that. And I don't know, come play. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you get a chance to quilt today.